Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome along to my new feature called 4¼ Sports, presented by me, Gregory Richardson, here on Puritans Radio. I've decided to call this feature 4¼ Sports because there are 4 sports that I follow in depth, such as rugby union, rugby league, ice hockey, and cricket. And I also tend to dip into something important that might be going on elsewhere. For example, last weekend, I watched Liverpool's last Premier League match against Crystal Palace, which finished in a fair 1-1 draw, and it was probably shown on Sky Showcase because of the fact that the Premier League trophy would be lifted at full time, hence why Sky probably chose to make the match more available to a wider audience. Furthermore, Ian and I have agreed to air my sports programme at 4:15 in the afternoon on Fridays, which is where the quarter bit comes from, I suppose, because 15 minutes past the hour represents a quarter of an hour. Anyway, welcome along to my sports feature, and today I'm going to be discussing the most important points of the Rugby Union European Finals, which both took place in Cardiff last weekend, as well as analysing the England-Zimbabwe Test match in brief, as well as talking a little bit about the Ice Hockey World Championships, because all divisions have now been completed, and there is some really important news involving Team GB and the Belfast Giants from the Elite League to share with you, which I hope will catch your attention. Towards the end, I'll highlight an important date coming up in the Rugby League calendar, and I will end with an important piece of information regarding football. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you strap yourselves in comfortably for this first ever episode of 4¼ Sports to help kickstart your weekend. And on that note, without further ado then, it's time to talk about the EPCR Rugby Finals. Just quickly, did you know that the European rugby offices were in Switzerland? Well, anyway, you do now, and if that surprises you, I can empathise with you because I felt the same when I discovered that on a plane last year. Anyway, on a more serious note, last Friday night, Bath overpowered Lyon by 37 points to 12 at the Principality Stadium on Friday night, and the match was played at less than half capacity, which was really disappointing, although with the costs I alluded to beforehand, that was not really surprising. On to the match then, and with all eyes on Finn Russell, the Scotsman was perfect from the tee, although he was much less impactful elsewhere, it has to be said. In fact, it was his halfback partner, Ben Spencer, who excelled on Europe's biggest stage. The Bath and England scrum half deserved his try at the end to seal the victory for his club, as Lyon failed to capitalise on Bath's ill-discipline, with Sam Underhill and Will Muir being the biggest culprits, as they both received first half yellow cards. Rugby refereeing is very inconsistent at the moment, and had Holly Davidson issued Sam Underhill with the red card that he should have received for a shoulder-to-head collision, which has yielded a sending off in 2 of the most recent Rugby World Cups. Who knows what may have happened in that final, but Johan van Graan's men eventually grew into the game and ran away with it, thanks to Benno Obano's important try in the second half, and that must have felt like redemption for him after being sent off at Twickenham himself last year. On Wednesday, Sam Underhill was actually cited and subsequently suspended for the remainder of the season, so he will not feature in Bath's quest for Premiership glory. Anyway, if you remember, I predicted a 35 points to 22 win for Bath, thinking that Bath would score 4 tries, but that Finn Russell would miss one of those conversions. But he didn't, and other than that, I was more or less spot on for Bath scoring, and as for Lyon, they could and maybe should have had 19 points, had they not been caught obstructing a running line off the top of a line-out with half-time approaching. So, in the grand scheme of things, I was not actually far off with my prediction. So, congratulations then to Bath, who won the Challenge Cup, and they will be playing Champions Cup rugby next season, and surely their target will be to go the distance in Europe's top flight next year. They definitely have the talent to get to Bilbao, so that will be very interesting to keep an eye on come the opening round played across the 5th, 6th and 7th December. Lastly then, commiserations to Lyon, who returned to top 14 duties this weekend in need of a result to get them back on track and in the hunt for a playoffs spot. And it should be doable, could be doable, especially as everything is really tight, as I said in last week's Greg's Rugby. Anyway, moving on to the Champions Cup final then, and what an arm wrestle that was last Saturday afternoon at the Principality Stadium. I was watching the match and I was thinking, as everything was happening and unfolding in front of me on the television, that it must have been up there in terms of one of the highest scoring first halves of any Champions Cup final. A fact that Lawrence Dallaglio confirmed and even developed by stating that it was officially the highest scoring first 40 minutes of the Champions Cup final ever in the Sunday Times sports section from 25th May. Yes, it was 20 points apiece at half-time, although had Mathieu Jalibert kicked his goals, Bordeaux Bègles could already have had a 4-point cushion come the interval. The French side seemed to be on top despite the fact that the scores were level, and that is no surprise considering the Saints lost the experience of George Furbank and James Ram, both very unfortunately within the first 5 minutes, which happened to be their best period of the game with the ball in hand. Having rather fortuitously won the ball back from the kickoff, Northampton were ruthless and Alex Coles managed to get the ball down after Saints piled on the pressure for the first few minutes. However, just a couple of minutes later, panic stations set in as Furbank received a knee to the head, and whilst people say it was accidental, you could argue that it was accidentally deliberate, so to speak. Anyway, it was good to hear that the international fullback was alright after a while, and Ram, as for him, had crutches in his hands on the bench, and unfortunately that reduced any capacity of Northampton's to affect the game with late tactical changes, something that Bordeaux had in their locker, and it certainly gave Phil Dowson's men a mountain to climb. Damien Penaud, the right winger and elected Champions Cup player of the season, grabbed a brace of tries in the first period, and Louis Biel-Biarré was exceptional once again. And despite the fact that the French club dropped the ball over the line en route to pushing a driving maul over in the second half, Bordeaux kept hammering away at the Saints line, and eventually Cyril Cazot scored the match-winning try. Although I would like to point out that 2 offloads or passes in the build-up were forward, and there is no question about it. It was so obvious, and despite Stuart Barnes writing in the Sunday Times that such an incident should be ignored because, in his words, the quest for a perfect game is ruining rugby, in equal measure, the touch judge's lack of support for the referee should be noted, and furthermore, if Marius Jonker, the TMO, can rule out Louis Biel-Biarré's first half effort after seeing the forward pass on the replay, why could he not do so then, especially when it was such an obvious infringement? From my point of view, it would be interesting to see what he writes if the Lions are on the wrong end of such decisions against Australia on their tour of Australia this summer. As I said before, the inconsistencies are ruining the game for spectators like myself who love the game, and even if people say that television match official or TMO reviews ruin the game, if you want a fair result, these forward passes should be called, especially when it is so obvious to everyone in the crowd that there are lots of oohs and ahs once everyone has seen the replay. Furthermore, one must not forget that Europe's top division final is the highest level of the professional game, bar the fact that it is not an international test match. And if referees such as Nika Amashukeli and Andrea Piardi are to be allowed to officiate international tests, the procedures set out by World Rugby should be followed and the correct decision should be made at this level, especially on the cusp of a British and Irish Lions tour. I mean, seriously, are you telling me that a Bath-Leicester final at Twickenham on Saturday 14th of June, that at such a game the English officials are going to allow the Tigers, or Bath for that matter, a decisive 80th minute try from a forward pass such as that which Bordeaux got away with in the second half in Cardiff? Really? If so, that would be outrageous. It really would. And if last weekend's final is an indication of the standard of officiating fans are to expect in elite finals going forward, it really is a joke. In fact, it is almost already beyond a joke, to be quite frank with you. I mean, what is the point of having Andrea Piardi as a touch judge if he sees his appointment for such an occasion as a free ticket to watch a final in the best stadium in the world? It is not just him though, and on that note, the same applies for the man or woman in the truck watching the action replays. What is the point of having Marius Jonker as the television match official if he is not going to act on something so blatant to everyone around the ground or to those watching on the television at home or in their local pub? I mean, let's face it, even Bordeaux would have been foolish to argue that their fourth try was legitimate had it been chalked off. Really, it was poor officiating all round. And as I pointed out after the game, Nika Amashukeli gave a lot of decisions against Northampton, and it was refreshing to see that pointed out in the national press for a change. But he did also arguably let Ed Prowse get away with a potential red card offence by only sending him to the bench for 10 minutes instead of all the remaining time. And Alex Mitchell got away with hauling Damien Penaud down by the arm without ever attempting to catch the ball, which should have been a yellow card as well. But instead, he was allowed to play on as the game drew to a close. And on that note, speaking of Alex Mitchell, I said in the lead up to the game that he would have to have a much better match on Saturday than he did at Twickenham last year if Saints had a chance of winning. And yet again, his opposite number shone in the limelight. Last year, funnily enough, it was Ben Spencer, and this year it was the much talked about and much anticipated Maxime Lucu, who even had the nous to nudge Bordeaux 3 points ahead with his long-range penalty attempt 4 minutes into the second half. It was certainly a cagey, stop-start affair, and you knew something was at stake, and in the end, Bordeaux were just about deserved winners, although it is no wonder that you win if you can be offside nearly all of the time for the entirety of the first half and be allowed a try from a clear forward pass in the second half. I mean, seriously, since when is American football? And as a rugby lover, something really needs to change. As rugby fans, we can really see how valuable Nigel Owens, Wayne Barnes and Romain Poit were as referees, although having said that, Wayne Barnes was another official who did seem blind to the odd forward pass or offload here and there as well. Anyway, I'd just like to say that I understand that no human is going to be perfect on the field, but when you have two assistant referees, your own knowledge of the rules having passed all of the exams, and all the technology available to help you to make the correct decision in crucial moments, these mistakes should not be slipping through the net, especially as there is opportunity to correct them there and then in the moment. Anyway, enough of a rugby rant. Congratulations to Bordeaux, who were ultimately deserved winners. They have become the 5th consecutive team to take the trophy back to France, as Toulouse and La Rochelle both did it previously in consecutive years. Toulouse in 2021, La Rochelle in both 2022 and 2023, and again Toulouse last year, and now Bordeaux begged in 2025. Who then will be crowned champions in Bilbao next year at the San Mamés Stadium? Well, needless to say, we will have to wait to find out, and I will move on in just a second. But just quickly, last week I said that Leinster and Toulouse had won the Champions Cup 11 times between them. I would just like to take a moment to quickly correct myself by saying that Leinster have 4 Champions Cup stars on their jersey and Toulouse 6, making that 10 stars for the two clubs combined. But that is still a brilliant achievement. Anyway, that is it for European rugby until the depths of winter, and for now it is time to move on to the cricket, because whilst the Champions Cup final was taking place at the Principality Stadium, Shoaib Bashir managed to snare the last few Zimbabwe wickets to defeat the African nation by an innings and 45 runs in Zimbabwe's first Test match on British soil since 2003. Wow, that was 22 years ago. Wow, that's gone quickly. Anyway, on to the serious stuff then. And at Trent Bridge in Nottingham on Thursday, 22nd May, in the men's one-off test, Craig Irvine won the toss for the tourists and elected to put England into bat. And it is fair to say that Zimbabwe made a bit of a hash of favourable bowling conditions. And once Ben Duckett and Zach Crawley were set, the writing was more or less on the wall as far as Zimbabwe were concerned. Having said that, the inevitable waft outside off stump never came from Zach Crawley, and he posted a vital 124, which for now has secured him a place at the top of the order in that first test against India at Edgbaston on Friday 20th June. The same goes for Ollie Pope, because the number 3 raced to 171 before being dismissed, but he would have been disappointed to add only 2 to his overnight score when he resumed last Friday morning at 11 o'clock. Anyway, England posted 565 for 6, and at that point one felt that the result was inevitable and that it would just be a matter of time before Zimbabwe crumbled, although it must be said that it did not quite work out as planned for Ben Stokes and Brendan McCullum. Firstly, Brian Bennett scored a beautiful 139, if ever a cricket innings can be described as such, and then, second time around, Sean Williams led Zimbabwe's resistance by scoring 88 before falling 12 runs short of what would have been a fantastic century. So that was a real shame, if I am being a little bit sentimental. However, having said that, with the Zimbabwe talisman back in the hutch, it was time for Shoaib Bashir to ruffle some feathers, and he span England to victory as he recorded career best figures of 6 for 81 in the second innings, having already taken 3 wickets in the first innings, and he can count himself unlucky to have not had a chance to claim 10 for the match, as Victor Nyauchi was unable to bat both times due to injury. More importantly, what did become apparent is that Stokes is at his best with the ball when fully fit, and England could really do with him being around for the whole summer, and he would have had a wicket straight away had Joe Root not shelled an easy one in the slip cordon, something that England must work on. Yes, because several times England were too defensive and a golden opportunity would have come about on multiple occasions had a third or fourth slip been in place, if Ben Stokes and company had set more attacking fields. Anyway, moving on, Ben Stokes did eventually make the breakthrough, and his ability to bowl will be crucial to the balance of the side when the first ball of that India series is bowled in just under 3 weeks' time. But what is also worth noting is that neither Josh Tongue nor Sam Cook really shone or posed a threat, and when Tongue did hit a good line in length, he was unable to keep any part of his heel behind the line. And against KL Rahul and co, that could end up proving very costly, despite Virat Kohli's absence due to his recently announced retirement from the game. On that note, it will be very interesting to see what 11 McCullum and Stokes choose for that first test match at Headingley, but I think the batting order will be as follows: Zach Crawley, Ben Duckett, Ollie Pope, Joe Root, Harry Brook and Ben Stokes, followed by Johnny Bairstow as the wicketkeeper batsman, although it is very much going to be a toss-up between him and Jamie Smith, who may discover how difficult Test cricket can be over the next few months or so if he ends up getting the nod. Anyway, the bowlers then will probably, or maybe should be, as follows: Shoaib Bashir, Chris Wokes, Gus Atkinson and Bryden Cars, although the batting order may not necessarily be that way in terms of how I listed them. But what that means is that Josh Tongue and Sam Cook will miss out, having underperformed in this one-off test match against Zimbabwe. There are also question marks over whether Bethel might play, but for me, the staff should back a player who has played himself into form in the test match arena by scoring 171, and not someone who is throwing the bat at it in franchise cricket. But I'm not the selectors, so it will be interesting to see what they do. Having said that, despite Crawley's ton at Trent Bridge last Thursday, he will remain very much under the spotlight across the first two tests, and if he does not get a score before leaving Edgbaston, the press will have a field day, despite McCullum's attempt to bat off claims that he is inconsistent and underperforming for England. Whilst all of that was going on then, England's women were playing a 3-match international T20 series against the West Indies women, and on Monday, England posted 144 for 5 after 20 overs, and the West Indies only managed 127 for 8 in reply. So hats off to Nat Silverbrunt's team for the 17-run victory and for pulling off a whitewash in that series. Anyway, for those who enjoy cricket, there is a lot more to look forward to over the coming months, including England's men's 3-match one-day international series against the West Indies, which began at Edgbaston yesterday, but as it was a day-nighter, I was unable to include the result in today's report, but I will talk about those matches in more detail next week. On that note, I will quickly move on to ice hockey now, because even though the season is now officially over after the USA clinched the gold medal at the World Championship thanks to Tage Thompson's overtime winner against Switzerland last Sunday night, there is important news surrounding Team GB. Yes, Great Britain finished top in Division 1A with 12 points in the table, so they will be going to Switzerland in 2026 for the Premier Division of the World Championships, and it is highly likely that they will play their 7 group games at Zurich's newly built Swiss Life Arena, as the groups have been revealed and they have been drawn with Switzerland, just like they were when they last competed in 2024. Why Zurich? Well, Zurich is the likely venue for Switzerland, as it is the former capital city before Bern became the new capital city in 1848, all those years ago. So, just a little bit of Swiss history for you, but back to the sport, and the reason why it may be of interest to keep an eye on the Belfast Giants next season is because Adam Keefe's men have been drawn away to three Swiss clubs in the group stages of the European Champions Hockey League for the 2025-2026 season. Therefore, the Belfast fans have a lot to look forward to, as they will play at some iconic venues in the qualifying rounds, including the Vaudoise Arena in Lausanne, the Postfinance Arena in Bern, and the Bossart Arena in Zug. Lausanne have been finalists for 2 seasons running in Switzerland, whilst Zug finally became champions in 2021 after being on the cusp of glory for a few seasons running leading up to that point, whereas Bern have not been Swiss National League champions since April 2019. So the Bern Bears will very much be hungry for European success, and they will undoubtedly look to recruit well over the remaining summer months in order to be able to perform to their potential come the autumn. As for Kalpa from Finland, who they play at home in Northern Ireland, former Geneva and National League and European champion Teemu Hartikainen has just moved back there, and he is delighted to be back in his hometown. Yes, Kalpa was his home, and after giving up the KHL due to the war in Ukraine, according to the series Breakaway, he was convinced by Geneva's ambitions in 2022, which they duly lived up to, as the French-speaking Swiss club lifted trophies in consecutive seasons, as the Eagles won their first ever National League title on 27th April 2023, before then clinching the European title on 20th February 2024, as they edged past Skellefteå on that historic evening in Le Vernet. The Finnish 2022 Olympic gold medalist and world champion will be hungry for goals again this season, and so Jackson Whistle will have his work cut out in front of his net. Whilst I do not know as much about Brinas or Yves Tampere, the latter is likely to be a competitive Finnish team, and so one thing is for certain: Belfast Giants have it all to do if they are to follow in Sheffield Steelers' footsteps and make the round of 16 come November. But it is certain that ice hockey really has the capacity to grow across the United Kingdom this coming season, as the national team are travelling to a hockey-mad nation in Switzerland in just under a year from now, and those Belfast games will be a taster for players like Whistle, who could feature in Team GB's squad for the World Championships in Switzerland between the 15th of May and the 31st of May 2026. Anyway, moving swiftly on then, and Arsenal's women beat Barcelona's women 1-0 in the Women's Champions League final last weekend, thanks to Stinas Blackstenius' 74th minute effort from 10 yards out. And tomorrow, the Men's Champions League final takes place between Paris Saint-Germain and Inter Milan, with kickoff scheduled for 8 p.m. With PSG in form after eliminating Arsenal in the semi-finals, whilst also finishing top in the domestic league, and after having just been crowned French Cup champions last weekend, without doing all the pre-match analysis that I did for last weekend's rugby matches, I would argue that Paris Saint-Germain head into the game as favourites, especially as Inter Milan only managed a second place finish in the Italian domestic league. But having said that, it is a final and you never know what is going to happen, which is what makes sport so intriguing, which is why we love it, isn't it? Anyway, last but not least, the Rugby League Challenge Cup finals. So both the women's and the men's take place at Wembley Stadium in 8 days' time, and there are still seats remaining if you wish to experience the iconic Wembley Stadium for a fairly decent price. The women's final will see Wigan Warriors face St Helens at 11:45 a.m. before Warrington Wolves play against Hull Kingston Rovers in the men's showpiece event at 3 p.m. in what promises to be a cracking final. Although, yet again, as it is a final, it might not live up to the hype because of the nervousness and tension that goes with such an occasion. With that in mind, it might be worth keeping an eye on how Hull KR fare against St Helens at Sewell Group Craven Park this evening, whilst also glancing at the score between Warrington Wolves and Castleford Tigers, which also kicks off at 8 p.m. at the Halliwell Jones Stadium. Just to add a bit of context for you, before any round 13 Super League fixtures are played, Hull KR currently sit 2 points clear at the top of the table, whereas Warrington Wolves are in 9th place. So it could be argued that a lot more hinges on the Wembley finale for Sam Burgess than it does for Willie Peters. But we'll have to wait and see what happens. Just quickly, and lastly, I would like to say congratulations to Novak Djokovic for claiming his 100th career title after being crowned champion at the Geneva Open last Saturday. What a player, and it is a real testament to him that he is still giving his all wherever he goes. Anyway, despite not mentioning events at Roland Garros, that is all I have got time for on today's 4 1/4 Sports. Thank you very much for listening, and if you wish to catch up on this episode, it is available on my YouTube channel. To find this episode of 4 1/4 Sports, simply search at Nideseg24 in the search bar and click on the first name of any channel that comes up on the list, and there is a big G, and right at the top of the list of programs will be this afternoon's episode. And on that note, it is time for me to hand you back to Ian, and I hope that the next song might be Remind Me by Tom Grennan. But stay tuned here on Puritans Radio to find out. Anyway, thank you, Ian. It's back to you for the rest of today's 007 Magazine Show Live.